a lot of the people who make games, like the majority of the industry, is white men. So we make very Western focused, Western based games and those are the ones that do well. But what Nyamakop is trying to do is that we are actively trying to create games for people of color, particularly the African diaspora and people on the continent, by making games that focus on authentically representing a lot of the cultures on the continent, but still creating an interesting and fun experience for anyone who wants to play and anyone who wants to experience the stories. The title we're currently working on, which is unannounced, is an Afrofuturist heist game where you reclaim African artifacts back from Western museums. And so I think that as time goes on, there is more of a push to tell stories that feel particularly African. And definitely in other countries such as Ghana and Kenya, there is more focus on telling African stories than in South Africa. I don't know if that answered the question.
No, that's okay. Everybody will speak with his own point of view, so that's okay. Mélissandre, maybe you can describe for you what is the video game that are made on African continent. Oh, Mélissandre has disappeared. Okay, no problem. She will come back. Teddy Kossoko. What is your definition of the video games that is made on African continent?
Sorry, okay.
Mélissandre is there.
So sorry, just answer the question. I couldn't follow for some reason. I keep going back and forth. Sorry about that.
Sorry. Okay. Do you want me to repeat the question? Is okay for you?
Yes, please. But is it
Okay.
Teddy who is going to answer then, or was it for me?
As you want. It's for you.
Okay.
I was asking about what is your definition of video games that are made on African continent?
Okay. Okay. So for me, the definition of African games, well, obviously made in Africa first, then made by Africans. So Africa is huge, 54 countries, if I recall.
Yes.
So as many countries, as many culture, as many ways to see the video games as well. And for me, it's about, I think that's what she said, Limpho, earlier, but it's about telling history and culture. Well, it's about telling history and culture of a specific country or a specific tribe. I don't know if you can hear me. It feels like
I can hear you.
Yeah, you can. Okay. So to me, that's an African video game. It has to have, for me, it has to have some elements of the culture, the way of life, the vision, the African vision, the African, that way African are so open and welcoming and sorry, I miss my word actually in English. But to me, that's what would be an African game as opposed to a Japanese or US game, which is also related to our world, but we have different visions in Africa, as far as I know, because I don't live there, but I have an approach of African countries, and so that's to me what it should inspire. Most of the games we have put at the Africa corner, they deliver. Most of them, they deliver something really related to their country or a tribe. But some of them just are games, like car games from Tunisia. It's like another type of car games that you can find in US, in Japan, in Europe. There won't be anything related to Africa, so it's just a game, but it's made by Africans. And it's good to know that games that seem really mainstream are also made by Africans.
Okay. We will talk about that later, but now it's just something to begin with, and after, of course, we can discuss more about that. Kossoko, what is your vision of video games that are made in African continent, on African continent?
We have to know that the video games made today on the African continent is what we can say at the beginning. It's like beginning of something, and yes, we have many people starting to create games. Sometimes it is car games, sometimes it is games based on cultures or mythologies or things like that, like what Kiro did with Orion in Cameroon. And yes, video games in Africa today is in what I think an early stage, and things are going to change in
evolve
the near future.
Change. Yes.
And many of people creating video games in Africa tries today to put or to tell the African stories, because in games created by Western companies, most of the time, if the game is the scenario of the game takes place in Africa, it is not going to tell the African histories. But today, African developers and video game companies tries to tell another history, to tell something different, and to show that Africa has also something to bring to the world.
Okay.
If I can just add something quickly.
Yes, you can add something, of course.
Thank you. I think it's a very broad question, because there are just so many things happening on the continent and happening in different countries that it feels very difficult to describe the games that are happening on the continent. Because as a lot of people on the panel have said, there are games that are just car games, or if you have games like Broforce that are just sort of 3D platformer games that don't necessarily tie into stories from the continent. But there are also stories or games that do tie into the culture and the history of the continent. And so it feels very difficult to fully describe everything that's happening on the continent of Africa, just as it would be difficult to describe games or the industry happening on the continent of Europe or North America or Asia. I think there's just a lot happening, and you can't put it all into one basket.
Actually, if I may, yeah, I think she's right. I jump there because actually it's not fair to ask for African to have an African video game specific,
it was just a question to start the discussion.
No. And I actually I am in both positions. Like, I like to say there are African games, and at the same time it's not fair to expect African games to be different. But what I understand from Africa is that today, nowadays, we are discovering a lot of things about the African history. So the young people as well, they are discovering things that have been hidden also by the biggest, countries such as France, United Kingdom, and so on, because there is an history behind as well, like the history with an H. A big H, and like today we discover patrimonial African patrimonial objects like the Gelede masks and other artifacts that are based or have been created centuries ago And we think, for instance, in Europe as art, but they actually are, they have specifics and they have specific needs. They are used for specific, specific, how can I say, events, and those are also telling histories that are not so well known by the young population and even the older population at some stage. And I think the the young African people who are trying to create games and to tell stories, they are trying basically to get back these old and ancient history that is not told yet, but they want to say something about that.
That is the topic of my next question. So
Sorry.
No problem. And Sidick,
I think the people before me have said a lot.
Yes.
So I think I'm going to take more the perspective on how the market looks like today,
Yes.
and what are some of the things. I could easily say that a lot of the game developers today are looking more at mobile games. Why? Because there's a lot of potential into mobile games. The internet connection before was 3G, now we're 4G. There's 5G coming up, so a lot of people are betting on the fact that it will be easier to touch an African customers on a mobile game rather than looking at a console game. So that's definitely something big there. Of course, you have a part of the game developers who are also looking at different demographics. They're looking more at international customers or at premium customers in Africa who may have access to a computer or who may have access to a console, even though you have more people doing PCs than consoles. Besides that, I think they said it all in terms of the type of game. A lot of cultural games. One, because it's an identity thing. We want to claim out loud and clear the fact that Africa is present. We have our own ideas. We have our own culture. But then again, we can see a new generation of game developers. When I say new generation, game developers who are developing a second wave of games now, who are looking more at internationally distributing their game, where they're making games that could work in Africa or elsewhere that do not necessarily have African colors, African themes. You look at Broforce, for example, she was talking about it. Broforce was a huge success. It was made in Africa, but when you look at the game, you don't necessarily you can't necessarily tell just from the first thing that it's an African game. And I think it's great as well. We need to have diversity and having games that look local and games that do not necessarily look local but are made by locals. So I think it's an interesting dynamic, and the future will be very interesting to see. There's definitely a lot of potential.
Okay. So what I see here is maybe we must consider video games in Africa by taking into account 54 different cultures finally, because every country has his own culture, and what you are saying is that we cannot define one type of video game in Africa, but we have to consider and take account of 54 different cultures in the same continent.
Sorry to interrupt you, but it's 54 countries.
Yes.
And each country has so many different cultures, and definitely the industries in each country are very different.
Yes.
I can talk at length about the industry in South Africa, but the industry in South Africa is an outlier in a lot of ways because of the demographics and the demographic makeup versus the industry in Ghana or Kenya or Ethiopia or Tanzania even. And so it's always very interesting to understand the dynamics. And I think that across the continent, there are some difficulties that we all have that may be similar, but there are also a lot of differences that are also very interesting to consider. But I also think that there's definitely like a big interest in telling stories or making games that are focused on specific cultures. There was a Kickstarter for the Mogadishu game by Alan Cupido, I think it is. And that was very focused on the continent and African cultures. And it made its money that it was looking for on Kickstarter in something like 48 hours.
Okay.
I can ask something.
Well, yes. Jennifer wants to talk in the audience. Jennifer, do you have a question or maybe something to add? Hi.
Can you hear me well?
Hi.
Yes.
Great. So yeah, sorry, I wanted to bounce back on what you were saying earlier, Limpho. And I just wanted to ask, since you said clearly diversity is a real topic right now in the video game industry. It's even like a very trendy topic. And I just wanted to ask, in the case of South Africa, is there something that companies are trying to work on, or rather, what kind of concrete actions are they trying to do to make things, to make more diverse games and to also include more people from African descent to actually create?
I'm sorry, I'm just laughing. I'm laughing because there's the honest answer and there's the nice answer, and I'm trying to decide which is best. I'm just going to go for the honest answer.
Okay,
so
I would rather prefer that.
Yeah, the honest answer is that the nature of the industry in South Africa is very problematic, because even though we're on the continent of Africa, I'm saying this and it's a joke, but it's also 100% accurate. There are more white men named Ben than Black women in the industry at the moment. And the industry is, if I'm very generous, like 400 people. But there isn't a there are actions that are trying to create, and I always get away from the word diversity, I think, because it makes it feel as though the space belongs to one group and they're just trying to add in more people. So I always try to say representation. So yeah, I think, Jennifer, you'd understand that feeling, right? Where it feels like the industry needs to be more representative of the world, of the country. And so while there are definitely plans to try and create more representation, I don't think that it's being done particularly well. And this is the point where I do a little bit of a show and dance for the company that I work for, because it's something that I very strongly believe in, where Nyamakop is the only studio so far that has 90% of the employees are people of color. There are literally 2 white people in a company where there are currently about 8 to 10 of us. And the goal is to continue in that route and to give people of color the tools to be able to grow and really enter the industry, and hopefully one day move on from our company and start their own companies that are representative and more diverse. But there are a lot of structural difficulties that make it harder. So, I mean, making a prototype costs at least R500,000, which is about 25,000 euros, and there isn't a lot of governmental support. And for the majority of Black people particularly, that's not doable, because we have to support families. We have to earn enough money to take care of ourselves. And so it's very difficult to get to that point. So we're hoping to change that around by having more prototype funding created. There's one studio that is slowly trying to incubate other games and give them the opportunity to make those prototypes, because I think once that happens, it's going to be a lot easier to find funding to make the games, to create more studios, and to create studios that are more representative of the population of the country of people of color. I really hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
It was very interesting. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you for the question.
Can I add something actually?
Yes,
sorry, yeah. It's very noisy around. I don't know if you hear me. There's a big echo. Okay. It's just what Limpho said reminds me of what we have also in Europe or maybe in France as an example where we have many different communities, especially the West Indian communities, where we never see any games or really rarely games that relate to the West Indies or the West Indian stories, which are part of France, but the same as she said, in the video game industry today, we have difficulties to find black people in the industry, and so obviously it reflects the fact that we also lack of interesting stories that we could have had if there were more black people within the industry. Well, that's something I wanted to say because to me it's important, and actually I'd like to work on that towards that to bring back a bit of the Caribbean stories in the video game industry scene, as Muriel Tramis did a while ago.
But I think that we have in France a longer history with French Africa, and maybe we are more. We tend to consider with care African culture in video games that West Indies, because West Indies and France, it's not a long history, you know. And for that, I just want to ask you: is a video game can be considered as a relay to transmit to the youngest generation that love video games tradition and heritage that tends to be lost? Maybe Teddy, you can answer.
I think that there is a space for video games to be a way to reconnect people to their cultures and to their heritage. And I definitely feel like in the last decade, I've seen a big movement from not only people on the continent, but the African diaspora all over the world, actively wanting to reconnect to that heritage, right? And I mean, if you look at other forms of media, if you look at TV shows, sorry, it's very loud around my house. If you look at TV shows, if you look at movies, there are a lot of stories that are created from the continent that are doing very well because people actively want to reconnect to the continent, to the stories being told here by Africans. I mean, there's a show called Power, which is an African-based story drama that is one of the highest rated TV shows in the United States. There was a show called Queen Sono, which was created, directed, acted by South Africans, that was the #1 watch show in Netflix in the United States, and obviously as well Black Panther. And these are very much in other media, but showing a hunger for stories that can reconnect people to their culture and their heritage in various ways.
For example, Teddy, when you made Kossoko with Masseka Games, do you feel like it was a duty or it was something that you have to do to represent African culture in your video games?
Yes, because you know I created Masseka Game Studio, and at the beginning Kossoko tribal game, because when I arrived in France in 2012, I noticed that many people in Europe and even in Africa doesn't know stories about the African continent. So I decided to create Kossoko tribal game in order to try to tell differently the story of Africa. And I noticed also that in the university where I I studied many people love and video games, and for example, I have some friends who wasn't been in Japan, but speak very well Japanese because of spending many times playing video games. So I say that if I can bring African histories, African stories inside video games, I can succeed to tell differently African stories. And you know, when we created Masseka Game Studio, the base of this studio is to try to not tell a country's history or story. For example, we are never going to create a game based on Kenya or Uganda or Central African Republic or Cote d'Ivoire. No, we try to go back before what we have before colonization, before you know, what people call balkanization of African continent. In our point of view, we are trying to erase frontiers between African countries. So when we create all games we have today, for each game we can touch with one game 3, 5, or 7 countries at the same time, because we have a group of population, and we see Africa like a group of population. So there is a game we are working on today, which is going to talk people in central in the center of Africa, because there are some people like pygmy and people living in forest, and some part of the game is going to talk to people in the west of Africa, and so this is the scope we have. And also we in this game we are working on another game. We are working with CNRS because they have ton of resources about Africa. The 10 past years, this institution sent many scientists in Africa in order to have many information about how people live in forests, and people live in villages and things like that. And all this information are for the moment just in some databases. And so CNRS, the Lycon laboratory, they gave us all of this data in order to use it inside our video games, and try to give it back to African people, and also to European people, in order to know what are African countries, or what is Africa, and what we have before, for example, colonization and things like that.
Okay. Mélissandre or Sidick, maybe you have an opinion about that, about the role, the relay for the video game to be a transmitter, something for the youngest generation, about cultural tradition, heritage.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think video game is a medium. The same way we had movies, the same way we had radio back in the days. Today we have video games, so it's a different way to transmit information from one person to the other. But I think it's a very powerful tool today. Why? Because if you look at history, Africa. Most of Africa's history is transmitted orally, in the culture. That's how, information was transmitted. It was, it was oral. So now video game uses the same basis of transmission orally, but it just adds the visual effects and makes it nicer and easier for people to grasp and connect with. Even though we in 2020, I can see that I have 3 daughters. One is very young, but the 2 other ones, the times where we connect the most and where I get there, where I feel them excited, is when I tell them stories. I make up stories of like old guys in villages and all things that happened like 200 or 2,000 years ago. I make it up, but I can see in their eyes the stars, and they're happy, and they ask me questions and things like that. So if we're able to take that and put that into a video game, imagine the kind of impact it will have. I was talking about kids that are 5, but you do the same thing for kids that are 10, for adults. And I think, we need to look at it as a way to transform the way we portray our continent, and the way we portray our own history, and in the way we accept where we come from. And I think it's very important. It's not just about claiming that, okay, yes, we are Africans, we have history. No, but it's about living our history, being happy with it, and then showing the outside world how it is. When you look at the US, in most of the movies, like 10, 20 years ago, there was always that superhero where you had the American flag, the colors, the red, white, blue, the stars, and it was subtle, but they were making sure that everybody listening to it knew that the United States was the best in the world, has the strongest champions and the strongest heroes. And why can't Africa do the same? We can do the same today and still make sure that we're able to tell the stories for our own children and for the rest, and so that we make the future better.
And I will add, because Sidick said a lot of great things, and the others too. I just will add that I think Black Panther was cited earlier, and Black Panther is a real example of what Africa has to say as historical facts. For instance, in that movie, you have the women who fight, so they are Amazons, and that is actually a fact in Africa during the Gezo reign. He was the first to have military workforce, female workforce, and this is taken from that era of Gezo, which was around late 1800. So and that says a lot. It means that women had some sort of impact in the society. It tells that they were considered as powerful as men. It tells a lot of the way African used to think before the colonization. Actually, in Africa, or in some of the countries in Africa, at least the Western countries, the week is not 7 days, but it's 9 days, and you have 1 day, for instance, that is only dedicated to women. So the way African thought about the women and men, for instance, and the place of women in men's in the culture, in their society, is now back into movies, and it's something that, for instance, could be used nowadays to exactly to tell how the vision of the society they had before, and that's really, really important. So to me, the video game has this part to play in this.
And mainly for the youngest generation, it's very important. Yes. I have something else for you in the discussion. This morning, Eve told us...
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm generally a problem like
no problem.
this. I think there's just a couple, like 1 or 2 things I want to add. I think that it's very exciting to be at a point in time where there are game developers who want to challenge the perception of the continent. I mean, I talk a lot about how it feels like currently in popular culture, there's been a commodification of Black pain, and as though there is a through line both on the continent and without the continent of like what connects Black people is the difficulties and struggles that we faced and the pain that comes with marginalization and racism. And I think it feels as though there is a push now to tell stories that are a little bit more vibrant and proud of our individual heritages and cultures and communities. And I'm definitely seeing a lot more of those kinds of stories in the media and stories being told. And that feels like more of a connective tissue for the industry at large on the continent of Africa. I always try and push for more individualizations when we talk about this, because I think that each country and within each country, each culture has a very individual and distinct story to tell. And I think it's quite exciting and liberating to see it in that view, and to also not only to show what Africa actually is. The example I always use of the problematic way that the culture is perceived is there's a rom-com called He's Just Not That Into You, and they showed, for Africa, they showed mud huts and dirt roads and a bunch of women speaking in a made-up clicking language about how he forgot your mud hut number, which is very offensive. Like, I am in a city with fiber internet and working on a MacBook. So to see stories that imagine not just where our cultures are, but where they could be in the future, and showing all of the brilliant, complex stories and cultures and people we have, is really liberating in its own way. That's really just what I wanted to say.
It was a nice addition, of course, and it was a lot of good things that you said. Just to know, I have something for this morning. Eve told us about that video games in Africa had to advance on a local side, but also on an international vision. What do you think about that? Where are the studio located on this perspective? Do they have to choose a side? This would mean maybe that the biggest studio would seek success on a global level, and that the smaller studios would focus only on local successes. Or the biggest studio have maybe to make games with more traditional content and more what you just talk about, that is to say that bigger studio has the duty to make also cultural games, or games that that rely on the heritage and cultural. I don't know if if you see what I want to orient the discussion, but if there is two different things, modernity and tradition, should the studio have to choose a side to make games?
I don't think so that studios have to choose a side. I think because everybody is not kind of activist in order to create games or games on cultural facts or things like that. Some studios just want to create a cars game or a game like Candy Crush. So I think people don't have to choose a side. They have to create games and to try to sell these games and to make money with. And I think the fact to put cultural contents in video games created by African developers are going to be natural, are going to come naturally. In Masseka Game Studio, for example, cultural games we want we are working on are very expensive, need many ton of researches, and most of the time it's complicated for us to find correct information, and yes, so for creating some casual games, it is very easy for us. It is not complicated because we don't have to have a ton of researches to include cultural contents, and sometimes to check, because for some of games, because we are going to talk about this kind of people or that kind of people, some historians, I don't know if it's the correct word in English, but some people who study history most of the time told us that we don't have to say this, or we don't have to say that, because there are many political things or stuff we have to try to avoid. So it is extremely complicated. And as developers in Masseka Game Studio, today we decided to try to work on both, and work on cultural games, and also to try to make casual games, but with cultural facts inside it. For example, we are working on a football 3D game, and this game is going to take place in Africa, but it is a casual game. You are going to make joggers and football tricks, but nothing special. But this game take place in Africa, and with a kind of storytelling around this casual game in order to tell a different history.
Okay, I see. You don't have to choose your kind of game, but in the game that you make, it's natural for you to put some cultural things.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I add on that?
Yeah.
I think what's also exciting is, instead of there being an expectation for there always to be a cultural element to games that come from the continent, to rather let that expectation not exist. Because personally, and I hope the people on the panel agree with me, I want it to be an active choice. And it's a choice that comes from a place of love and pride, of just wanting to show the diversity of ideas and new experiences to people because it's enjoyable to do so, versus feeling a pressure to do that with any game you make. I don't think that every game that comes off the continent needs to have a particular message about the continent, but rather just be a good game that people can enjoy. And I think I'm just feeding into the point from the previous speaker by saying that.
Okay. And Sidick, maybe you want to add something about that, about not to choose if you made a game for a worldwide vision, or if you made a game for local vision.
Yeah, no, from my side, I think it's important not necessarily to choose. I think one studio can decide to pick a scenario that's on a game that was done on a history in Benin, and tomorrow to build a game on the World War. I remember, for example, there's a game that came out a couple of months ago from Tunisia, where they based it off of the World War, and that game is great. It's a multiple online battle arena game, and it's just great. And I think that kind of diversity in the type of productions that are coming from Africa are definitely going to make it worthwhile for people to get more interested in what Africa can provide and what African developers can provide. From my perspective, I think it's important we always pick one topic and do it the best way possible, so that people can live and go through the experiences. I always make the parallel between video games and movies, because I love movies, and two, I just think a video game is an evolved version of movies, because it's a movie, but you can just interact by pressing a button or a couple of buttons. And I think in the movie industry, we saw that a lot. You have some great producers and great people who built movies today on drama. Tomorrow they change it and did an action game, and then changed again. And we love the kind of games that they did, not necessarily because they're from the United States or from France or from anywhere else. We love them because the topic was great. We love the actors because the topic or the way they acted was great, regardless of where they're coming from. So I think at some point, the same will happen in Africa. Right now, there's a new way, because people weren't used to seeing people developing from Africa. So that's why there's a lot of emphasis on it's a game from Africa. But you will see, give it 5 years, we'll be focusing on, okay, what did Nyamakop do? Or what did Masseka game do? And people will just focus on what kind of game these guys were able to do. They exploded and made a couple $100 million. That's what people will focus on, and not just the kind of game. Of course, I'm always pushing for more diverse, for more African stories to be told. But I also understand that we need to put our Africa on the map through different ways.
Okay.
Yes, I actually agree with Sidick. I was about to say the same thing. Okay, I have an echo. Okay, no.
No, it's okay.
Africa or African countries have their chance also to be part of the map, as he said. And so if it means doing games that are not necessarily related to African history or African themes, well, be it, because they have also to have a chunk of the market. But I'm thinking about a studio that we had at the Africa Corner for 2 years, which is the studio. Sorry, I just have a gap now. Lomé Studio. They released a game named Dahalo, and I have to say that. They had to decide basically to who they would want the game to be sold to. So they chose European or American territories rather than African territories, because they made a game on PC and they tried to put the latest technology behind the creation of that game. But at the same time, they put forward an history that is proper to their island, which is Madagascar. And the history is really unique to Madagascar. But they wanted to make it spread across, the globe, by doing something that looks like American games, because that's what sells more today. So they had to choose. They made two choices: use a proper history of their own, of their country, their island, but using the criteria of American or European, Occidental, let's say, Occidental countries. So it's not easy for an African company, or an African-based company, to choose, but obviously they can do both games that have nothing related to Africa, besides the fact they are African, so the games are still African. And they can also choose to do something more specific. And I think the word that someone said, I think Teddy said it, it's to be engaged. You have to have an engagement towards what you want to say, why you want to say it loud, why the message is important about that fact or that history or that moment in time, and so on.
Ouais, on n'a pas entendu la fin. We haven't heard the end of your.
It's yet. Okay, I don't know where you stopped.
But maybe yes.
I was just saying that what I was saying is that, as Teddy said earlier, some studios will be engaged basically they will want to tell stories and history that are hidden or not well known, and so that's pure engagement. Basically, it's something you want people to know something about a specific period, a specific. Voilà, it's that's what I was saying. I don't know if.
Okay, that's okay. So maybe we will have a last word from all of you. We can start by Limpho, about your vision of the African video games between modernity and cultural heritage.
I think for me, the goal is to have, and I'm not going to talk about the whole continent because I don't feel like I'm an expert enough on every country, but definitely for South Africa, my vision is for it to be a more representative industry where there are more Black people and African people working and creating games, whether those are games that speak to their culture and their heritage or just games that they're interested in making. That's my goal. And I'm very excited to be working on a game that focuses on the pride, the joy, and the happiness of the industry and of African cultures and heritage, and to imagine where our cultures and heritage can be in the future and what kind of positive impact they can have in the world. And that's really all I hope for. I'm really grateful to have been a part of this panel. Thank you all so much.
Oh, thanks to you, of course, because it was very instructive for all of you to have your knowledge and all your words. Maybe Teddy, a last word about your vision of video games between heritage and modernity. Hello? Sorry.
I have to say a last word. I have just to say that for me, African developers need to take time they need and they want in order to create a unique universe.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to try necessarily to copy what is happening
Yes,
all around the world.
Mm.
And they also don't have to choose between modernity and tradition. Maybe they can they can they can merge both to give to the world something unique and different. In Asia, in many countries, in Asia, they have a unique way to create games and unique ways to tell the stories.
Yeah.
And in Europe, it is also different. And I think that has also to bring something new in the world, a different category of game. We don't have to copy what people do in the world. And we have this we have everything to have how to say it in English. Yes, we have this capacity to create something unique, and so when there is a game created somewhere, people can say, "Hey, this is the African touch. This is not the African touch."
But maybe Sidick, we want a last word from you about your vision of video games between modernity and heritage.
I mean, first of all, thanks to all of you, for listening in. I think, we're very happy because yesterday helped us get to where we are, and I think we have an opportunity today to shape our future. So, I think it's very important for all the African developers and for everybody that's interested in helping and supporting the development of Africa to stay focused on the fact that the future is definitely going to be with Africa and with players from Africa. And I think we really have to be smart in the way we use our heritage and the way we use our culture to make sure people get the best out of it, learn from it. But at the same time, we need to be able to tackle on the future's problem and also presenting solutions with our African eyes to current problems that don't necessarily use or are based on our heritage. I think we need to be at the forefront of what's being done today, and we need to make sure that people realize that we have the same skills as everybody else in the world. And I was really happy to join the panel, and thanks for having me.
Okay, we were more than happy to have you with us today to speak about everything, to speak about video games in Africa. It was a great pleasure. And at last, Mélissandre, the last word about modernity or heritage in video games.
Well, I think the video actually will speak for itself, meaning that in Africa, you have so diverse countries with a diverse economical situation. So you obviously have also diverse ways to see the video games and the progression of what is a video game in different countries. In north of Africa, it's a bit more developed in terms of technologies. South as well. Then you have the eastern and the western countries in Africa. So the games will relate to what the market is actually able to absorb at the moment. Most of the games being in mobile, this is what we can find the most. But there are also, as we could say earlier, with Cameroon, we have one studio who does who creates PC games, for instance.
Okay, that was your conclusion.
Yes.
Up. Oh. Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure to have you today on this talk. And I think that's someone. Oh, okay. And thank you to everybody. And it was a great pleasure for me, of course, to be with us. Even if my English tend to be worse and worse at the end of the day. Thank you for your patience and your comprehension. And we see you next year for the same thematic, because it will be a thematic over 2 years, this year and the next year, of course, because we are more than impatient to meet you all in person next year in Bordeaux. So thank you to everybody, and see you next year. Bye bye.